In the sterile, white-walled laboratory of chronodynamics, the air hummed with anticipation. The team of scientists, clad in lab coats and equipped with the latest in temporal technology, stood around the centerpiece of the room, a sleek, cylindrical device pulsating with an otherworldly glow. This was the temporal displacement unit, the culmination of decades of research and experimentation. And today, it would be used for a purpose far beyond mere observation. Dr. Evelyn Grant, the lead scientist and visionary behind the project, paced the length of the lab, her mind racing. This was it, the moment they had worked for. The moment they would reach back into the past and change the course of evolution itself. "We've run the simulations 1,000 times," Evelyn said, mostly to herself, though her words were audible to the entire team. "We know exactly where and when to intervene. The risks are manageable." Dr. Malcolm Hayes, her second-in-command, glanced up from his console, his brow furrowed. "Evelyn, I know we've planned for every possible outcome, but are we sure we understand the full implications of this? Once we alter the past, there's no going back." Evelyn stopped pacing, her sharp blue eyes locking onto Malcolm's. "We're not just altering the past," she replied, her voice steady. "We're correcting it. The species we've targeted is on the brink of extinction. Our intervention will ensure their survival and, in turn, the survival of our future. We owe it to humanity to see this through." The species in question was a small, resilient mammalian ancestor that had shown extraordinary potential in early simulations. By enhancing their genetic makeup and altering key environmental factors, the team hoped to guide their evolution towards a more advanced, cooperative society, one that would eventually benefit humankind. The plan was simple in theory: send a small, genetically engineered team back in time, make the necessary adjustments, and return to a future where the positive impacts would be evident. But the execution was anything but simple. Time was a delicate fabric, and even the slightest ripple could cascade into unforeseen consequences. Evelyn moved to the central console, her fingers dancing over the touch-sensitive controls. The temporal displacement unit hummed louder, its glow intensifying. "Prepare the team for departure," she ordered. "We begin in T-2 minutes." As the minutes ticked down, the atmosphere in the lab became electric with tension. The team members took their positions, each one focused on their task. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement mixed with a twinge of fear. They were about to play God with the fabric of time, an act that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Finally, the countdown reached 0. The room filled with a low, resonant hum as the temporal displacement unit activated, its energy warping the air around it. The transport team, clad in temporal suits designed to protect them from the anomalies of time travel, stepped into the chamber. "Remember," Evelyn said, her voice calm and authoritative, "this is a one-way trip. You'll be integrated into the timeline of the target species, and your actions will be the catalyst for their evolution. The fate of the future rests in your hands." The team members nodded, their expressions hidden behind the reflective visors of their suits. Without another word, they entered the temporal displacement unit, the doors sealing behind them with a hiss. Evelyn watched as the device pulsed with light, the temporal energy building to a crescendo. And then, in an instant, the team was gone, displaced to a time millions of years in the past, to a world where they would sow the seeds of a new future. The lab fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the now idle device. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her hands gripping the console. The first step had been taken, and there was no turning back. But as she stood there, staring at the empty chamber, a small, nagging doubt crept into her mind. Had they truly accounted for everything? Or had they just unleashed something far beyond their control? Only time would tell. The temporal displacement unit had hummed back to life, the lab's sterile air vibrating with its residual energy. Dr. Evelyn Grant stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the empty chamber where moments ago, her team had been transported to a distant past. The future now lay in the balance, shaped by the interventions they had just set in motion. Days turned into weeks as the world outside the lab continued its relentless march forward. But inside chronodynamics, time felt strangely suspended. Evelyn and her team monitored the data feeds constantly, waiting for any sign of change, any ripple in the timeline that would indicate the success of their mission. And then, one morning, the first anomalies began to appear. Evelyn was reviewing the latest simulations when a soft chime from the console drew her attention. A stream of data began to scroll across the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. The first results were coming in. "Malcolm, get over here," she called out, her voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Malcolm Hayes hurried to her side, his eyes narrowing as he took in the data. The reading showed a subtle shift in the genetic markers of the target species, just as they had planned. The modifications were taking hold, guiding the species down a new evolutionary path. "It's working," Malcolm murmured, his voice a mix of awe and relief. "The genetic alterations are stabilizing. The species is adapting." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glued to the screen. The data was promising, showing an increase in cognitive abilities and social cooperation among the species. The changes they had introduced were creating a more intelligent and organized group, exactly what they had hoped for. But as the days passed and more data poured in, the initial excitement began to give way to unease. The simulation showed that while the species was evolving as intended, there were also unexpected variables emerging, traits and behaviors that hadn't been predicted. "Look at this," Malcolm said one afternoon, pointing to a section of the data that had just updated. "Their social structures are becoming more hierarchical, more rigid." "That wasn't part of the plan." Evelyn frowned, studying the data more closely. He was right. The species, which had initially shown signs of cooperative behavior, was now developing a more complex social hierarchy. Leaders were emerging, and with them, a new dynamic of power and control. "It could be an adaptive response," Evelyn suggested, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "Maybe this hierarchy is necessary for their survival in the environment we've created." "Or it could be the start of something we didn't anticipate," Malcolm countered, his tone cautious. "These kinds of shifts can have far-reaching consequences." Evelyn knew he was right, but she wasn't ready to admit it. The project had been her vision, her creation. She had believed so strongly in the benefits of their intervention, in the idea that they could shape a better future. But now, the uncertainty was creeping in. The weeks turned into months, and the changes in the target species continued to accelerate. What had started as subtle modifications were now becoming pronounced, as the species adapted to their new reality with startling speed. And then, one day, the data feeds from the future began to show something entirely unexpected. Evelyn stared at the screen, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Malcolm, you need to see this." Malcolm rushed over, his face paling as he read the data. This can't be right. The population growth, the technological advancement, it's all happening too fast." The species they had altered was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. Their numbers were exploding, their societal structures evolving rapidly. And most concerning of all, they were developing technology at a pace that rivaled human civilization. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "We were supposed to guide them, not create a rival." The realization hit them both like a tidal wave. The species they had intended to help had become something else entirely, something that could one day challenge humanity's place in the world. "We need to stop this," Malcolm said urgently. "We need to go back and undo the changes." But Evelyn shook her head, her mind racing. "It's too late. We've already altered the timeline. If we go back now, we could cause even more damage. We need to find another way to manage this, before it spirals out of control." But deep down, Evelyn knew the truth. They had unleashed something far beyond their control. And now, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The future had arrived sooner than anyone had anticipated. Within the span of a few short years that had passed in mere hours for those in the present, the species they had intervened upon had transformed into something unrecognizable. The once small and resilient mammalian ancestors had evolved into a highly advanced civilization, one that was rapidly surpassing the achievements of human history. Dr. Evelyn Grant watched in silent disbelief as the simulation data unfolded on the screen. The species, now known as the Loran, had developed complex social structures, intricate languages, and sophisticated technology. What had begun as a well-intentioned intervention had spiraled into the creation of a rival species, one that now stood on equal footing with humanity. "They've established cities," Malcolm said, his voice filled with awe and dread as he pointed to the holographic display of the Loran's territories. "Look at this, they're building infrastructure, creating systems of governance, and their technological advancements, they're progressing at an exponential rate." Evelyn's stomach churned as she took in the data. The Loran were not just building a society, they were crafting an empire. Their technological achievements, particularly in energy manipulation and communication, were advancing at a pace that defied explanation. They had even begun exploring space, something that had taken humanity centuries to achieve. How did this happen so quickly? Evelyn whispered, more to herself than to Malcolm. "We only made small adjustments, how did they accelerate so fast?" Malcolm shook his head, still trying to process the enormity of what they were witnessing. "Maybe it was a combination of factors, our genetic modifications, the environmental changes we introduced, or maybe there was something inherent in their biology that we didn't account for. But that doesn't change the fact that we're now dealing with a civilization that could challenge us," Evelyn replied, her voice tinged with fear. "We've essentially created our own competition." As the days passed and more data flowed in, the true extent of the Loran's capabilities became clear. They had developed artificial intelligence systems, advanced weapons technology, and had even started experimenting with time manipulation, an area of research that had only recently been pioneered by humanity. "This is getting out of hand," Malcolm said one evening as they reviewed the latest reports. "They're not just a rival, they're on the verge of surpassing us. If they continue at this pace, they could become the dominant species on Earth." Evelyn knew he was right, but the enormity of the situation left her paralyzed. How could they have allowed this to happen? What had started as a noble effort to guide a species toward a better future had turned into a potential extinction event for humanity. "We need to make contact," Evelyn said finally, her voice steadying as she formulated a plan. "If the Loran continue to evolve without any understanding of what we've done, they could see us as a threat or worse, as something to be conquered. We need to open a dialogue, find a way to coexist before it's too late." Malcolm nodded slowly, though there was doubt in his eyes. "And what if they don't want to coexist? What if they see us as the very thing holding them back?" Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, they had no idea how the Loran would react. But doing nothing wasn't an option, not anymore. They prepared a series of carefully crafted messages, designed to explain humanity's intentions and their role in the Loran's evolution. The messages would be transmitted via quantum communication, a technology that had been perfected by the Loran but was still in its infancy for humans. The hope was that the Loran would recognize the significance of the communication and respond in kind. The first message was sent, and then they waited. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, and with each passing moment, Evelyn's anxiety grew. And then, one morning, the response came. The lab was filled with a tense anticipation as the Loran's message was decrypted. The message was simple, direct, and utterly chilling. "We know who you are. We know what you've done. Your time is over." The room fell silent as the words sank in. The Loran had not only acknowledged humanity's role in their evolution but had also made it clear that they saw humans as a threat, one that needed to be eliminated. Evelyn felt the weight of their mistake like a crushing burden on her chest. They had tried to play God, and now they were facing the consequences. The Loran had risen to power, and now they were ready to challenge the very species that had created them. "We have to prepare," Malcolm said, breaking the silence. "If they're going to come after us, we need to be ready." But Evelyn wasn't sure if there was any way to prepare for what was coming. They had unleashed a force far greater than they had ever anticipated, and now that force was poised to destroy them. As the days grew darker, Evelyn could only wonder, had they sealed humanity's fate with their hubris, Or was there still a chance to find a way out of this impending disaster? The response from the Lauren had left the world on edge. The once silent and empty halls of chronodynamics were now buzzing with activity, as humanity braced for the possibility of an all-out war with a species they had unwittingly created. The tension was palpable, the fear almost tangible. Dr. Evelyn Grant watched from her office as teams of scientists, military strategists, and government officials worked tirelessly to prepare for what seemed inevitable. The Lauren had made their intentions clear. They saw humanity as a threat, and they were ready to act on that belief. But the question that haunted Evelyn's every thought was how to prevent a conflict that could end in the destruction of both civilizations. "Evelyn, we need to talk." Malcolm's voice broke through her reverie. He stood in the doorway, his expression grave. Evelyn nodded, gesturing for him to come in. "What is it, Malcolm? More bad news?" Malcolm sighed, taking a seat across from her. "We've run simulations on potential outcomes if this escalates into a full-scale conflict. The results aren't good, Evelyn. The Lauren have advanced so quickly that their technology now rivals our own in many areas. If we go to war, it's not clear who would come out on top or if there would even be a victor." Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "We can't let it come to that. We have to find another way." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "I agree, but the options are limited. The Lauren have made it clear that they don't trust us. They see us as the aggressors, as the ones who meddled with their evolution. From their perspective, we're the villains in this story." Evelyn opened her eyes, meeting Malcolm's gaze. "Then we need to change the narrative. We need to show them that coexistence is possible, that we don't have to be enemies." Malcolm shook his head slowly. "It's not that simple. The Lauren are a proud species, and they've come to see their rapid advancement as a sign of their superiority. They may not be willing to share this world with us." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. Evelyn knew that Malcolm was right. Convincing the Lauren to see humans as equals would be a monumental challenge. But she couldn't accept that war was the only solution. "We have to try," Evelyn said firmly. "We owe it to both species to find a way to coexist. If we don't, we'll be responsible for a conflict that could devastate the entire planet." Malcolm nodded, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "There may be one way. It's risky, but it might be our best shot at opening a dialogue with the Lauren." Evelyn leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What is it?" "We send an emissary," Malcolm explained. "Someone to meet with the Lauren leadership directly, to negotiate face-to-face. It's dangerous, but if we can establish some form of communication, it could prevent a full-scale war." Evelyn considered the idea. It was risky, yes, but it was also bold, and it might be their only chance. "Who would we send?" Malcolm hesitated before answering. "It would have to be someone with knowledge of the project, someone who understands both the science and the stakes. Someone like you." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The idea of going directly into Lauren territory, of facing the very species they had altered, was terrifying. But as the weight of the situation settled over her, she realized that there was no one better suited for the task. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll go and meet with the Lauren leadership. If there's even a chance that we can prevent this conflict, I have to take it." Malcolm's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly nodded in agreement. "I had a feeling you'd say that. We'll start preparing immediately. We don't have much time." As the preparations began, Evelyn felt a mixture of fear and determination. She knew the risks. She might not return from this mission. But she also knew that it was a risk worth taking. The fate of both civilizations depended on it. The day of the departure arrived quickly. Evelyn stood on the platform, surrounded by her team, as the transport vehicle was prepped for launch. The air was thick with tension, and the faces around her were a mix of hope and dread. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" Malcolm asked, his voice tinged with concern. There's still time to reconsider. Evelyn shook her head. This is something I have to do. We started this, Malcolm. It's up to us to see it through. Malcolm nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. Good luck, Evelyn. We'll be monitoring from here. Remember, you're not alone. With a final nod, Evelyn stepped into the transport vehicle. The doors closed behind her, sealing her inside as the engines roared to life. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As the vehicle lifted off, leaving the safety of human territory and heading towards the unknown, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder what awaited her on the other side. The Lauren were a mystery, their intentions unclear. But whatever happened next, she knew that this was the only chance they had to avoid a war that could destroy them all. The transport sped through the sky, carrying Evelyn towards her destiny. The world below grew smaller, and the future loomed large before her, uncertain, unpredictable, but full of possibility. The transport vehicle glided through the dense atmosphere of the Lauren homeworld, its engines humming softly as it approached the landing coordinates. Evelyn sat in the cockpit, her hands gripping the armrests as she watched the alien landscape unfold below her. The world was both familiar and foreign, a blend of lush, green forests and towering, gleaming spires that reached towards the sky. The Lauren had built a civilization that was as advanced as it was beautiful, a testament to their rapid evolution. But as the vehicle descended, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. She was about to step into the heart of a civilization that saw her species as a threat. The weight of the task ahead pressed down on her, but she knew there was no turning back. The vehicle touched down with a soft thud, and the doors slid open with a hiss. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped out onto the landing platform. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. But there was also an undercurrent of tension, a sense that she was being watched from every angle. A group of Laurens stood at the edge of the platform, waiting for her. They were tall, their features sharp and elegant, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their clothing was a mix of intricate fabrics and advanced materials, blending the natural and the technological in a way that was uniquely their own. One of the Laurens stepped forward, their gaze fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. This was clearly the leader, the one who had sent the message that had shaken humanity to its core. Dr. Evelyn Grant, the leader said, their voice smooth and calm, yet laced with an underlying edge. We've been expecting you. Evelyn forced herself to meet the leader's gaze, drawing on every ounce of resolve she had. I'm here to talk, she replied, her voice steady. There's been a misunderstanding between our species, and I believe we can find a way to resolve it peacefully. The leader's eyes narrowed slightly, their expression unreadable. Misunderstanding? You altered our very evolution, shaped our history according to your will. And now, when we've grown beyond your control, you come to talk of peace. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt, but she refused to back down. We never intended to harm you. Our goal was to ensure the survival of both our species. But we underestimated the consequences of our actions, and for that, I apologize. But conflict between us will only lead to destruction on both sides. We have a chance to create something better, to coexist as equals. The leader tilted their head slightly, as if considering her words. Your species is known for its ambition, its desire to control and dominate. How can we trust that you won't attempt to manipulate us again? Evelyn took a step closer, her eyes pleading. Because we've learned from our mistakes. We've seen what happens when we try to control too much. We're here, unarmed, vulnerable, because we want to prove that we're committed to peace. The leader's gaze flicked to the other Lauren, who stood in silent observation. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the decision they made in the next few moments could determine the fate of both civilizations. Finally, the leader nodded slowly. Very well, Dr. Grant. We will hear what you have to say. But know this, we will not be swayed by empty promises. If you truly seek peace, you must be prepared to offer more than words. Evelyn nodded, relief flooding through her. Thank you. That's all I ask. The leader gestured for her to follow, and together they walked towards the towering spires that loomed in the distance. As they moved deeper into the Lauren city, Evelyn marveled at the blend of nature and technology that surrounded her. The Lauren had achieved a level of harmony with their environment that humans had only dreamed of. They entered a grand hall, its walls lined with intricate carvings and glowing symbols that pulsed with a soft light. The leader led Evelyn to a circular chamber at the center, where a group of Lauren elders awaited. Their eyes were filled with wisdom, but also with suspicion and caution. "Speak," the leader said, taking their place among the elders. "Tell us why we should trust you, why we should not see your species as a threat to our existence." Evelyn took a deep breath, her mind racing as she prepared her words. This was at the moment that would determine the future of both their species. "We share a common goal," Evelyn began, her voice clear and strong. "The survival and prosperity of our civilizations. What we did in the past was wrong, but we can't change that now. What we can do is move forward together. You have achieved incredible things, and we have much to learn from you. In return, we can offer you our knowledge, our resources, and our friendship. We can build a future where both our species thrive, not as enemies, but as allies." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. Finally, the leader spoke. "Your words are sincere, Dr. Grant, but trust is not easily given. We will consider your proposal, but know this: we will not be subjugated, and we will not be controlled. If there is to be peace, it must be on equal terms." Evelyn nodded, understanding the gravity of their words. "I wouldn't ask for anything less." The leader rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "We will deliberate, and you will have our answer soon. Until then, you are our guest. Use this time to learn about our people, to understand what we have built." Evelyn thanked them and was escorted to a chamber where she would wait. As she sat alone, her mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. The fate of two civilizations rested on a fragile hope, and all she could do now was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed in a blur as Evelyn remained in the Lauren city, surrounded by a civilization that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The Lauren, true to their word, treated her as a guest, but there was always a sense of distance, a reminder that she was an outsider in their world. Evelyn spent her days learning about the Lauren, exploring their cities, and observing their way of life. She marveled at their technological advancements, their seamless integration of nature and technology, and the wisdom that seemed to permeate their society. But she also saw the pride that ran deep in their culture, a pride that made them wary of outsiders, especially those who had once tried to control their destiny. Every night, as she lay in the chamber they had provided for her, Evelyn's thoughts returned to the impending decision. The Lauren were deliberating, and the outcome of their discussions would determine the fate of both species. Evelyn had done all she could, and now it was out of her hands. On the morning of the fourth day, a Lauren attendant came to her chamber with a message. The elders had reached a decision, and she was to meet with them immediately. Evelyn's heart raced as she followed the attendant through the winding corridors of the grand hall. She had prepared herself for every possible outcome, but the uncertainty still gnawed at her. What if they had decided that peace was impossible? What if the Laurens saw no path forward but conflict? The attendant led her to the circular chamber where the elders awaited. The leaders stood at the center, their expression as inscrutable as ever. Evelyn took her place before them, standing tall despite the fear that churned within her. "We have considered your words carefully, Dr. Grant," the leader began, their voice calm and measured. "Your species has caused us great harm, but you have also shown a willingness to make amends. It is clear that you understand the gravity of your actions, and for that, we acknowledge your sincerity." Evelyn held her breath, waiting for the leader to continue. "However," the leader said, their tone sharpening, "trust is not easily rebuilt. The wounds of the past run deep, and we cannot simply forget what was done. We have deliberated long and hard on this matter, and we have reached a decision." The silence that followed was deafening, and Evelyn felt her heart pounding in her chest. "We will allow your species to coexist with ours," the leader said finally. "But there will be conditions. First, you must cease all attempts to interfere with our evolution. We will determine our own path, free from your influence. Second, we will establish a neutral zone between our territories, where neither species may venture without the express permission of the other. This will serve as a buffer to prevent misunderstandings and conflicts." Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was far better than she had feared. The Lauren were offering peace, even if it was a cautious and guarded one. "I understand," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "These terms are fair, and I will relay them to my people. We share your desire for peace, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that our coexistence is a peaceful one." The leader nodded, their expression softening slightly. "There is one more condition. We expect your species to provide assistance in areas where we may need it: scientific knowledge, resources, and technology. In return, we will share our advancements with you, on the condition that they are used responsibly." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "We accept. Cooperation between our species is the key to our mutual survival and prosperity." The leader stepped forward, extending their hand, a gesture of trust. Evelyn took it, sealing the agreement between their two species. It was a momentous occasion, one that would shape the future of both civilizations. "You have our word, Dr. Grant," the leader said. "But know this, we will be watching. Any violation of this agreement will be met with swift and decisive action. We have no desire for conflict, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." Evelyn nodded, understanding the gravity of their warning. "We will honor the agreement. You have my word." With that, the meeting was concluded. Evelyn left the grand hall with a sense of accomplishment, but also a heavy heart. The road ahead would be difficult, and the peace they had forged was fragile. But it was a beginning, a chance to correct the mistakes of the past and build a better future. As she boarded the transport vehicle that would take her back to human territory, Evelyn couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since the project had first begun. They had set out to guide a species toward a better future, but in the process, they had been forced to confront their own flaws and limitations. The Lauren had grown beyond anything they had imagined, and now, it was humanity's turn to grow, to learn from their mistakes, and to forge a new path forward. The vehicle lifted off, carrying Evelyn away from the Lauren city and back towards the uncertain future that awaited her. The world had changed, and now, they would have to change with it. As the city disappeared from view, Evelyn made a silent vow to protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated.